Welcome to Making the Most of Your Financial Aid Balance Check. It's brought to you by the Financial Literacy Program, and I'm glad you're here to learn a little bit about what the balance check is, especially if you apply for financial aid. But more importantly, how do you make it last for 15 weeks? And 15 weeks is because that's the length of a semester. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So what is a financial aid balance check? Well, let's define that. And that is the remainder of the financial aid available to the student after tuition and or on-campus housing has been paid for. So every semester, before we go ahead and give the aid to the student or whatever's left over, we first need to go ahead and pay tuition and on-campus housing, because those are the two charges that we have over control here on campus. And so it's the remainder of that money. The balance check can include grants, scholarships, and loans. When you actually receive the balance check, you really don't know what's included in it, but just know that it can be a combination of any of those three. The financial aid balance check can also be a physical check or an electronic deposit, and I'll actually go into detail of what that is, but it can come in one of two forms. It is created every semester, if applicable, once financial aid is dispersed, and I'll also explain what that means. But if you submit a FAFSA or a California DREAM Act application and there is money remaining, then every semester we'll go ahead and make that available to you. Now, this financial aid balance check goes by other names according to college students, and I just wanted to share what that is. Financial aid, my check, my money, my e-refund. Go ahead and feel free in the chat room to, just for fun, add any other names that college students usually refer the financial aid balance check. But I just wanted to set the context of what a financial aid balance check is. Now, the financial aid balance check is available, like I said, every semester. We usually like to define an academic year as a fall semester and a spring semester, each of them having 15 weeks. And so for the fall, when the financial aid balance check is available to you after we've paid tuition and on-campus housing, assuming you lived on campus, it's good for, the remaining money is good for September, October, November, and December. And then in the spring, we start all over again, because when we award aid, we actually award you for the whole academic year, but we go ahead and divide it in half. So half of it is available for fall and the other half is available for spring. And in the spring, the amount that's left over is available for you for February, March, April, and May. Financial aid does not pay in January because CSUN students are actually on vacation. And in the summer, that's a whole different that's totally different, because that falls under what we call summer financial aid. Now, I'd like to ask the chat room, do you know when is your financial aid check first available? What do you think? I'll give you maybe about 30 seconds to chime in. I am curious. So I see here the first 2 weeks of school. That is correct. So normally what we do is we look at the first day of school. So in this case, for this semester, it was August 24th. And what we do, we go back 10 days. And then we disperse. That's when we first begin to disperse, 10 days before school starts. And that's a good thing to know, so that in the spring, you kind of give yourself an idea. So 10 days before school starts, we go ahead and disperse. And then the money is available within those 2 weeks. But it also depends what form you used, whether it was to get a physical check or to actually do the e-refund. Now, who gets a balance check? There is an assumption among college students that everyone gets a balance check. We do find students who may come into our office and say, you know, where's my money, where's my e-refund, where is my check? And it's not necessarily true. And so what I put here for you to see is 3 scenarios, or in this case 3 different students, so you can see who gets a balance check and who doesn't based on their expenses. So all of these 3 students have the same total financial aid package, and in general, financial aid package basically means it can be grants, loans, scholarships, whatever is it that they have in their package, and all of them, for the sake of this example, is $5,000. But if we look at student number 1, he or she decided to enroll full-time, and so full-time at this institution is $3,282. They're not living on campus, and so once we take their aid, disperse it, we go ahead and settle the tuition, then their financial aid balance check will be available to them for $1,718 that they then can use for the next 15 weeks. Student 2 is receiving the same financial aid package, but they are also enrolled full-time, so $3,282, and they also decided to live on campus, which is a charge that we can go ahead and pay when we disperse the money or pay it out. And so in this example, on-campus housing is $3,200. Unfortunately, this student will not receive a balance check because, as you can see in red, they actually still owe the university. They're still being charged $1,482. Student 3 is receiving, again, $5,000 financial aid package, but they decided to enroll half-time. And half-time at CSUN is $2,499. They're not living on campus, and so their financial aid balance check will be $2,501. And so what we will discuss from this point forward is basically, well, then once you have that money that's left over after those expenses or charges have been cleared, which is tuition or on-campus housing, and it's and/or, it's not both, but it's and/or depending on your situation, then you can see who's the person who's actually going to get a balance check. Now, where do you check? Where do I check for a balance check? It's actually very simple, and I put here 5 steps actually in how to check for a balance check. The first thing you need to do is you need to log in to your CSUN portal, and once you log into your CSUN portal, you want to get to the section called CSUN Student Account Information. And that's usually the place where you can actually see how much you owe the university. Once you do that, step number 2, you check the term, and in this case you would check for fall or spring, depending on the term that you're interested in, and then you will see the total charges. Now in this example, to go ahead and see if you're actually going to get a balance check is to see this example that I'm showing here, that you need to make sure that your tuition or your housing charges have been paid, so that you can have a balance of 0. If you have a balance of 0, like in this example in part 2, then you know that, okay, my money has been dispersed and they have already settled the account before I end up getting my balance check. Another way to check too is if you check in section 3 there, where it says anticipated aid. When the aid has not yet paid out, you will see anticipated aid. So right now you're seeing spring as an example here for next semester, because that money is actually on hold until next semester. This example is showing that my fall aid has already dispersed, so it's no longer anticipated. It's already been forwarded to the accounting office. They went ahead and settled my tuition and or housing. And then on part 4 here, if I click on show history, then it will open up literally a whole transaction history of what has been happening to your account. And then on part 5, if you scroll down for the particular semester in question, in this case, let's say it's fall semester, it actually says financial aid balance check. It gives you the amount, and then it actually tells you when that balance check was created. And in this case, for example, it was created on September 8th. That's just an example there. But this is true every semester. Every semester you can go ahead and check if you're getting a balance check, and 2, the amount that you're receiving, and 3, when it was created, so that you can give yourself an idea how soon you're going to go ahead and get and receive the financial aid balance check. Now there's 2 ways to receive a balance check. On the left you see that one way, which is a traditional way, is just a physical check. Now the check is created days after the financial aid is dispersed to your account, and so as earlier when I had asked the group here, when is the first time that you can receive a balance check? Usually when we disperse 2 weeks before school starts. Well, days after that disbursement, that's when we go ahead and start creating this check. The check is in your name. We mail it to the address that's listed in your CSUN portal, and usually arrives a week later. So for example, let's just kind of give you a timeline. So if we disperse on a Thursday, we take the whole weekend to kind of settle accounts, in this case tuition and or housing, and then the following Tuesday we start go ahead and creating the check in your name, and during that week we put it in the mailbox, and then the mailman, he or she, will go ahead and deliver it to your home, and it can take about a week, you know, especially if you live a little further away. Once you receive it, you can cash it and it's ready to use. On the right I have here e-refund. Now e-refund, we also call it direct deposit. So those two words are interchangeable, but e-refund is the official term that we use. Now it does require that you sign up via the CSUN portal. It is a faster way to actually receive your money. The reason why you need to sign up is because you need to create a routing number and an account number from your checking or savings account. So you need those two pieces of information, whether it's a checking account or savings account. Then it's direct deposited into your bank account within a week. It's a little faster than a check because it's all done electronically. You know, no one has to physically deliver a check to you. It actually goes right into your account. It's important, and this is just a tip from me to you, make sure that you are creating your own checking or savings account and you're using that information so that the money makes it directly to your account. Once you receive it, you may get a notification. I know that our accounting office actually sends you an email saying we're about to deposit money into your account. This is the remainder of your financial aid, and it's available for immediate use right after you receive it. Now, there is a concern that students tend to live like professionals while they are students, and then end up living like students when they are professionals. What we really would like to see is that students live like students while they are students, so that then later they can go ahead and live like professionals when they are professionals. This is a very powerful quote, and the reason why it's very powerful is because there's some truth into it. From the beginning when we're in college, we need to kind of learn how to manage our money. I'm glad that we have this program called Financial Literacy to kind of teach you on how to do that. But early on, you end up building skills, habits that can go ahead and follow you later in life. And so it's important to practice those money saving skills, those money management skills now. And if it is, you know, having to live frugally, in other words, managing your expenses, trying to live within your means, and that is living like a student now, delaying gratification so that you can go ahead and later not graduate with a lot of debt, which right now student loan debt is literally over $1 trillion. College students are just graduating with too much debt. Well, so what can we do about it? Well, one of the things is here I'm showing you an example of a budget or a cost of attendance chart. And so these numbers are arbitrary. There's just an example. But it comes down to goals and priorities. But let me ask the chat room first, in the audience here. If I was to ask you, or if we asked undergraduate students, or just students in general, college students, what are the two most important expenses that you need money for, that are very important, and if you can only pick two that you would need aid for, or money, what would they be? Go ahead and type in your answers there. I'm just curious to see what you think would be the two most important expenses that students would really need money for. Let's see, I'm getting books and transportation. Okay. I'm also getting personal and books. I'm also seeing tuition and transportation. Okay. Well, the answer, because we actually did this survey when we did ask college students, they responded that tuition was one of the most important expenses. It makes sense, right? You need to pay your tuition so that you can be graded, actually then get a grade at the end of the class, get the units, and then after so many units, complete your degree so you can get your diploma. So that's important. The second one was actually room and board. In other words, a place to live and food. That's what they usually call room and board. Those were the two most important expenses. Now, of course, I followed up and I asked, well, what about books? They mentioned that yes, books are important. It's an importance, but it's not as important when you begin to prioritize and set goals that, okay, I'm going to make sure that I have money for tuition and room and board. Then they begin to have secondary, third, priorities. And books, just basically, they decided, well, I'll just make some changes to that. If I can't afford brand new books at the bookstore, then I will go ahead and buy used books. I'll rent them. The same thing for transportation. They basically felt that if I can no longer afford to drive to campus, because either one, I can't afford the parking, the semester parking pass, or I can't just put gas in my car anymore, then I'll think of other ways to get to campus. And this was just a way to start looking at the priorities of what is important when it comes to your expenses. And so I invite you to start thinking about what are those important expenses, especially if you had to limit them to 1, 2, or 3. So how do you make the most of your balance check, in this case your financial aid balance check? How do you make it last 15 weeks? And so I'm bringing back this chart just to kind of show you again that when we dispersed aid, we dispersed it every semester, fall and spring. And so in this example, let's use fall. When we dispersed it, about mid-August, and then after tuition and housing is paid, then you get your money, and you need to budget for September, October, November, and December. Here are some tips. One of the things you can do is break your check into monthly amounts. So once you receive, for example, a $2,000 balance check, well, it's $2,000 that's supposed to last 15 weeks. If you and a semester or 15 weeks is usually 4 months. So if you break that into 4 individual months, so $2,000 divided by 4 would be $500. Then you create scarcity. By the way, I had heard a podcast, and I'll make this available later, but I heard a podcast where that was a very good tip, that if you break your balance check into monthly installments, in this case $500 each, then you create scarcity. In your mind, you pretend as if you don't really have money, because you don't really have $2,000. You actually have $500 available. $500 for September, $500 for October, $500 for November, $500 for December, as an example. And what happens is, because you're breaking your money into these smaller, more manageable amounts, and you almost think that you don't really have any money, you begin to prioritize your expenses, and then you start really seeing what's actually important to you. And you should definitely give it a try. You will see. It really does help. So let me provide you some other tips on how to manage your spending while you are in school. One of them is to create a budget. The budget is really just a spending plan. Do you actually have a spending plan? It helps you know where you stand. It also helps you with your priorities and goals, because if you put your money to work and you actually give it direction, then you're less likely to spend it in any other ways because you're prioritizing your money. Another tip is just to reduce your expenses. If, for example, earlier I mentioned a $2,000 financial aid balance check, but I really only have $500, well, if my expenses are $600 for that month, what can I do to reduce those expenses so that I can stay within budget? And you're definitely invited to kind of check that. For example, is there ways you can reduce your groceries a little bit? Are you eating out more than you should? Is there ways you can kind of bring those expenses down a little bit? For example, are you commuting more? Is there other ways where you can maybe commute 2 days a week and then consider other forms of transportation? So there has to be just some willingness to reduce some of those expenses and stay within that budget, so that you can then be in a position that you don't run out of money before, in this case, for the next month or for the next semester. Live within your means. Consider to make changes. You are a college student, and what does it mean to be a college student? Well, that means that you have to be frugal with your money, which means you have to be willing to think a little bit of what those expenses are as a college student. Right, books are important, clothes, food, tuition, and can you really live like a professional while you're a student? Well, no, that's the concern that I had shared earlier. You need to learn how to live like a student so that later these habits follow you. You can then live like a professional, which means that you have the means to live a little bit more comfortable. But if being a student means you need to have money for those needs, expenses you have now as a college student, you definitely need to just learn how to live with the new means. That means delaying some of those wants that you may need, and I'll talk about that. Live off campus. One of the tips I like to give is why don't you consider creating a cashier's check for the rent that you have coming up. So earlier I had mentioned that let's say my balance check is $2,500, but I live off campus and my rent is $500 for the next 4 months. Well, instead of saving that money, what I can do is I can create cashier's checks so that I'm less likely to spend it for each month. And so really all I really have to spend is $500 because for every month I've set aside that rent. And so that just a behavioral, but it helps. It's just a good technique there. Another tip is just to check your needs versus wants. There is a very defined line between needs versus wants. Needs are those expenses that you need money for. They're fixed. They usually don't tend to change. And wants are those expenses that are flexible. Yes, we would like to have them, but can we actually afford them? And what happens is that line is getting very, very thin. And so now almost every want is becoming a need. At least that's what I'm seeing. I'd like to encourage that you create that line right in the middle and know that there's needs that have to be addressed. And if you can, if you've been saving, if you've been keeping an eye on that budget, can you then afford your wants? And so what I did here, I gave you some example of fixed expenses. Tuition, books and supplies, rent, utilities, insurance, other. Go ahead and share in the chat room what do you think are some other fixed expenses. Now for flexible, I went ahead and changed it up. Now for flexible it's those expenses that do tend to change and that we can either reduce greatly. Remember earlier I said reduce your expenses. Well, I'm actually referring to flexible expenses. For example, food is a flexible expense. Now we do need to eat, but do we need to eat out every day of the week? No, we can reduce our expenses. And if we do eat out every week, do we have to eat at a sit down almost every time? No, we can make changes, right? Credit cards is also a flexible expense because over 80% of undergraduate students have credit cards maxed out at over $3,000. Could you reduce your credit cards down to a manageable amount or zero so that you can have money for those fixed expenses? When a student comes in and says, I need money for books, but I don't have enough, well, are you checking your flexible expenses? Clothing, yes, we need clothes, but are there alternatives to shopping so that you can manage those expenses? Transportation, same thing. Personal, cell phone is a big one. It's been argued that cell phone is a fixed expense, but it's really a flexible expense because you have choices, right? You don't have to have the latest and greatest cell phone at this time. You can have the same cell phone last you all your entire college career, and then when you graduate, reward yourself with a better cell phone, or maybe consider changing your plan. Instead of unlimited, maybe you want to have a limited plan. Entertainment, that's another flexible expense because there's different ways to entertain ourselves. For example, do you really want to go and spend money at the theater, or maybe consider reading the book? Personally, I think the book is way better anyways. Can you get a financial aid balance check again? This has been a question I've received from students. So for example, earlier the chat room was correct when they said, well, usually the money is dispersed 2 weeks before school starts, and then we get our money within 2 weeks. But what happens in the middle of the semester? Can I get a balance check? And the answer is, well, yes. Here's an example. Did you receive a scholarship sometime during the semester? Every time that we go ahead and receive the new award or an adjustment to the financial aid award, we go ahead and check in against any charges that are on your account. If there isn't, then in this case, for example, a scholarship, we will go ahead and process it, and then you'll get another balance check, and that will be, for example, for the scholarship. Maybe at the beginning of the semester you decided not to borrow student loans, which is fine, you have that right, but then later in the semester you decided that you did. Well, then once you accept the loans, you do what you're supposed to do, then we check it against your charges. If there's no charges, then we go ahead then and create a balance check, which is basically the student loans. Is it possible to get a balance check again? Yes, if your financial aid award is adjusted. So I know within the first 3 weeks of school, students are adding and dropping classes at will. Well, your aid gets adjusted. So it's possible that you got a little bit of financial aid for the first 2 weeks, but then all of a sudden in the third week you added more classes, and so your aid goes ahead and increases. So if we already dispersed part of your aid and gave you a balance check, well, it's possible that later we probably owe you a little bit of the difference. So it is possible to continue to give balance checks depending on what is going on with your account. So I just wanted to go ahead and make that clear. I wanted to just take a moment to highlight the mission of the financial literacy program at CSUN. It's about 40 years old, this program, about 3 years actually. But the mission of the financial literacy program is to expand students' understanding of money management strategies that will empower them to make wise and informed financial decisions. And that's really what financial literacy is to make informed financial decisions while achieving their educational goals at CSUN. I want to invite you to also consider going into our YouTube channel that we have. We call it CSUN Financial Literacy, where we have past webinars on different topics. You know, how to buy a car, what's the difference between credit cards and debit cards, how to prevent identity theft. And so I invite you to go ahead and continue to learn and become wise and an informed financial decision maker as it pertains to go ahead and adding as you're achieving your goals here at CSUN. And with that, have a great day.